The sea gave up nothing but silence, and Captain Lieutenant Werner Brandt did not trust silence. He pressed his eye to the attack periscope of U-47, scanning the gray November horizon somewhere southeast of Newfoundland. His breath fogged in the cramped conning tower. The Atlantic was empty. That was the problem. The Atlantic had been empty for 3 days. Yet his radio operator kept intercepting distress calls from merchant ships being bombed 200 miles to the east. Bombed by aircraft. Aircraft that could not exist. Contact bearing 035, his lookout called. Aircraft. Multiple aircraft. Brandt swung the periscope. 7 twin-engine bombers flew in tight formation, heading northeast toward Britain. Hudson bombers, British markings flying low enough that he could count the rivets on their fuselages. They passed overhead without deviation, without circling, without any indication they had spotted the submarine lurking below. They simply flew on, toward a war happening 3,000 kilometers away. "That's the 4th formation this week," his first officer muttered. "Where are they coming from?" Brandt had no answer. The nearest land was Newfoundland, 500 kilometers to the west. No aircraft carrier operated in these waters. No se puede entender. Yet bombers kept appearing from the western horizon, flying east in steady streams that grew heavier each month. It was November 1940, and something impossible was happening in the North Atlantic point 3,000 kilometers away. In the gray offices of German naval intelligence in Berlin, Corvettan Captain Friedrich Hesse was trying to solve the same puzzle. He spread his reports across a desk already buried in paper. U-boats sighting reports, radio intercepts, shipping manifests stolen from Lisbon, weather observations from submarines patrolling the convoy routes. Each piece of evidence pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. Hesse had been a mathematics professor before the war. He approached intelligence work the same way he had approached proofs: gather evidence, eliminate contradictions, follow logic wherever it led. The logic was leading him somewhere he did not want to go. The aircraft were real. Dozens of U-boat commanders had reported them, single-engine fighters that could not possibly cross the Atlantic under their own power. Twin-engine bombers appearing over the mid-ocean gap where no land-based aircraft should reach. 4-engine heavy bombers in formations that grew larger each week. All heading east, all originating from empty ocean that he pulled a decoded message from a stack. A Norwegian merchant captain, secretly working for British intelligence, had been careless in Lisbon. His briefcase had been photographed. One document mentioned Botwood Seaplane Facility. Another referenced the Newfoundland installation. A third contained a single word that Hesse had circled in red ink: Gander. He found Gander on his charts, a lake in the interior of Newfoundland, far from any known settlement. The area was marked as wilderness. No roads, no railways, no population. Yet the British were apparently flying aircraft from this empty forest and delivering them directly to the war. Hesse began calculating. If the aircraft were being ferried across the Atlantic, they needed runways long enough for heavy bombers. They needed hangars, fuel storage, maintenance facilities, housing for crews. They needed an infrastructure that should have taken years to build. According to his intelligence, the first aircraft had departed this mystery airfield only weeks ago. That meant someone had built a major military installation in the Canadian wilderness in less than 4 years, in complete secrecy, without German intelligence detecting a single phase of construction. The implications made his hands shake. If the British could ferry aircraft across the Atlantic, they could replace their losses faster than the Luftwaffe could inflict them. If they could build invisible airfields in the wilderness, what else were they building? The entire strategy of the U-boat war rested on strangling Britain's supply lines. But you could not strangle an enemy who was receiving aircraft by air. He requested a meeting with Admiral Canaris, head of the WWII. The admiral listened in silence as Hesse presented his findings. When he finished, Canaris stared at the map for a long moment. "You're telling me," the admiral said slowly, "that the British have built the largest airfield in the world in a location we cannot reach and are using it to deliver aircraft directly to the war?" "Yes, Herr Admiral. And we knew nothing about this." "Nothing, Herr Admiral. The airfield does not appear on any map. The location was apparently chosen specifically because it was invisible. Canaris turned to the window. Snow was falling on Berlin. Somewhere over the Atlantic, another formation of bombers was flying toward Britain. If this is true, the admiral said quietly, then we have already lost the Battle of the Atlantic. We simply don't know it yet. That night, Brandt surfaced to charge batteries. His lookout spotted running lights moving east, another aircraft formation, the third in 12 hours. In the red glow of the control room, his crew watched him in silence. The aircraft kept coming. They would keep coming. And somewhere in the frozen wilderness of Newfoundland, the largest aircraft carrier in the world sat waiting for dawn. The map on Friedrich Hesse's wall looked like the work of a madman. Red strings connected intercepted radio transmissions. Blue pins marked U-boats sighting reports. Green circles indicated estimated aircraft ranges. At the center of this web sat a single black dot labeled with a word that had become his obsession. Gander. 6 months of investigation had transformed fragments into certainty. The airfield was real. It was vast beyond anything Germany had ever built, and it was winning the war. Hesse had reconstructed the facility from scraps, a shipping manifest showing aviation fuel deliveries to Newfoundland Airport, a decoded message mentioning 4 runways operational, a report from a Portuguese fisherman who had glimpsed concrete through coastal fog. Each fragment added detail to a picture that grew more terrifying with every edition. The airfield now housed an estimated 12,000 personnel. It processed hundreds of aircraft monthly. It possessed the most advanced communications equipment in the Western Hemisphere. Winston Churchill himself had reportedly called it the largest aircraft carrier in the North Atlantic, and it did not appear on a single German map. "Photograph it," Admiral Canaris ordered. "We need proof." The task was impossible. Gander lay beyond the range of any German reconnaissance aircraft. The Focke-Wulf condors that patrolled the Atlantic could barely reach the convoy routes, let alone penetrate into Canadian airspace. U-boats could not approach the coast without triggering Canadian patrol aircraft. The only option was human intelligence, and there were no German agents in Newfoundland. 5,000 kilometers away. Samuel Pilgrim loaded crates onto a railway car and wondered if God had gone mad. He was 19 years old, born in a fishing village that had died when the cod stopped coming. Now he worked at an airfield that had appeared from nothing, in a place where nothing had ever been, serving a war he did not understand. 3 years ago, this had been bog and black spruce. Samuel remembered the construction crews arriving by railway, hundreds of men who spoke English with strange accents. They had cleared forests, drained swamps, poured concrete in quantities that seemed designed to rebuild the earth itself. Runways stretched for miles. Hangars rose like cathedrals. A town materialized between the tarmac, complete with barracks, hospitals, bakeries, and a movie theater. Samuel did not know why the airfield existed. No one told laborers strategic secrets. But he watched the aircraft arrive, crated in pieces, assembled by crews working through Arctic nights. He watched them take off at dawn, formations of bombers climbing into clouds and vanishing toward Europe. He understood that death traveled east from Gander, and that somewhere across the ocean, men were dying because of work done by his hands. The scale of it frightened him. Aircraft arrived daily now, sometimes hourly. Liberators with 4 engines that seemed too heavy to fly. Hurricanes and Spitfires strapped to the decks of transport ships, then assembled in hangars that never stopped working. The airfield had become a factory whose product was destruction, and Samuel was a cog in its machinery that in Berlin, Hesse received new orders. The Reich could not photograph Gander. It would infiltrate it instead. Captain Heinrich Lang, a veteran operative who had survived missions in Norway and Spain, was selected for insertion. A U-boat would deliver him to the Newfoundland coast. He would make his way inland, photograph the installation, and return for extraction. Lang studied his briefing materials with the calm of a professional. False papers identifying him as a Canadian merchant seaman from Halifax. A camera con cieli di Natobacotin. Cyanide capsules sewn into his collar. He understood the mission was likely suicide. Canadian patrols had intensified. The coastline was watched. But Berlin needed proof, and proof required sacrifice. The installation must be verified, his handler explained. High Command does not believe the scope of what intelligence suggests. Lang smiled without humor. And if I confirm it, then High Command will know the truth. What truth? The handler looked away. That we are building one U-boat while they are building 100 aircraft. That mathematics has already decided this war. The U-boat departed from WWII in February 1941. Lang spent 3 weeks in a steel coffin, breathing recycled air, listening to depth charges explode in the distance. The boat surfaced at night off the Newfoundland coast, and he went over the side in a rubber raft, paddling toward a darkness that contained the largest military secret of the war. Behind him, the U-boat slipped beneath the waves. Ahead, searchlights swept the sky above Gander. Samuel Pilgrim was working the night shift, unloading aircraft engines under floodlights that turned midnight into noon. Neither man knew the other existed. Neither understood how their fates had become intertwined by the weight of numbers that was crushing Germany's hope. The aircraft kept coming. They would always keep coming. And somewhere in Berlin, Friedrich Hesse added another pin to his impossible map. Heinrich Lang had been walking for 11 days when he first saw the lights. He crouched in frozen underbrush at the edge of a ridge, his body shaking from cold and hunger, and looked down at something that stopped his heart. The airfield stretched to the horizon. For concrete runways, each long enough to land the largest bombers ever built. Hangars lined the tarmac in rows that seemed to continue forever. Searchlights swept the sky. Aircraft sat wingtip to wingtip, so many that he stopped counting at 200. Trucks moved between buildings. Men in uniforms walked in organized streams. The installation glowed against the black forest like a city that had fallen from the stars. Lang had seen military bases in Norway, in France, in Spain. He had photographed shipyards and factories and ammunition depots. Nothing had prepared him for this. The facility before him was not merely large. It was industrial. It was a machine designed to produce aircraft the way a foundry produced steel, in quantities that made individual courage meaningless. His hands trembled as he raised his camera. The cold made focusing difficult. Dawn was approaching, and he needed to photograph everything before the light revealed his position. Click! A row of Liberator bombers. Click! Fuel storage tanks the size of apartment buildings. Click! A runway stretching into fog, its end invisible even from this elevation that in the valley below. Samuel Pilgrim worked the early shift. He had been promoted to aircraft maintenance, which meant longer hours and better pay. This morning, he was inspecting a flying fortress that had arrived from California 3 days ago. The bomber had crossed an entire continent to reach this frozen forest, and tomorrow it would cross an ocean to drop explosives on Germany. Samuel did not think about the men who would die. He had learned not to think about such things. The aircraft were machines. His job was to ensure the machines worked. What happened after they left Gander was not his concern that he noticed a stranger at 0547. A figure at the perimeter fence, barely visible in the dawn light, holding something to his face. Samuel's first thought was that one of the American airmen had wandered off during the night. His second thought was that Americans did not wear civilian clothes. His third thought was that the figure was photographing the hangars. For a long moment, Samuel did nothing. The stranger lowered his camera and began moving along the fence, heading toward a gap where construction crews had been working. In 90 seconds, he would reach the breach. In 2 minutes, he would be inside the perimeter. Samuel could shout. He could run for the guards. He could do his duty as a citizen of an empire at war. Instead, he walked toward the fence with deliberate calm. The stranger froze when he saw Samuel approaching. His hand moved toward his coat pocket. Samuel stopped 10 meters away and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Patrol comes through in 8 minutes. You need to leave. The stranger stared at him. His face was gaunt, weathered by days in the wilderness. His eyes held something Samuel recognized. The look of a man who had seen too much and understood too little. Why? The stranger asked. His accent was wrong. Not American. Not British. Something else. Samuel did not know why. Perhaps because the stranger was alone against an empire. Perhaps because Samuel had grown tired of being a cog in a machine of death. Perhaps because mercy was the only rebellion left to him. "Because you've seen enough," Samuel said. "Go tell them. Tell them what's here. Maybe they'll stop sending submarines to die." The stranger held Samuel's gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest point 1,000 kilometers southeast. Werner Brandt surfaced his new command, U-221, into a night filled with enemies. Radar-equipped patrol aircraft from Gander had forced him underwater 6 times in 48 hours. His crew was exhausted. Their nerves were shattered. The Wolfpack tactics that had terrorized convoys in 1940 now felt like suicide. Aircraft bearing 270, his lookout called. Closing fast. Brandt ordered crash dive. The submarine plunged into darkness as depth charges exploded above. In the chaos of foam and pressure and terror, he understood what Friedrich Hesse had been trying to tell Berlin for 2 years. The aircraft were not a problem to be solved. They were a verdict. Germany had built the finest submarines in the world, crewed them with brave men, and sent them against an enemy that could produce aircraft faster than U-boats could sink ships. The mathematics was simple. The mathematics was merciless. The mathematics had already decided the war in Berlin. Heinrich Lang's photographs arrived 3 weeks later. They showed an airfield so vast that analysts initially believed the images were fabricated. When verification confirmed their authenticity, the file was classified at the highest level and buried in archives where it could not damage morale. The aircraft kept coming. They would always keep coming. And Samuel Pilgrim returned to work the next morning, inspecting machines of death as if nothing had happened, carrying a secret that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The envelope sat unopened on Admiral Donit's desk for 3 days. Inside were Heinrich Lang's photographs of Gander, verified by intelligence analysts, annotated with estimates that read like a death sentence. For operational runways, 37 visible hangars, 216 aircraft captured in a single dawn exposure, fuel capacity sufficient for sustained operations lasting years. Friedrich Hesse stood before the Naval High Command in a conference room that smelled of cigarettes and despair. He had been recalled from his teaching position to deliver a final assessment. His superiors had spent 2 years dismissing his warnings as defeatism. Now, they wanted numbers, and numbers were all he had left. The Gander facility has delivered approximately 5,000 aircraft to Britain since November 1940, Hesse began. His voice carried no emotion. Emotion was a luxury analysts could not afford. Sister facilities at Goose Bay and Stephenville have delivered an additional 3,000. Combined Atlantic ferry operations now exceed German aircraft production by a factor of 4. The room was silent. Outside, Berlin was being rebuilt from RAF bombing raids. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Furthermore, Hesse continued, anti-submarine patrol aircraft operating from Gander have reduced U-boat effectiveness in the Western Atlantic by 60%. Wolfpack operations that succeeded in 1940 now result in submarine losses exceeding 70%. The mathematical conclusion is inescapable. An admiral interrupted. What conclusion? Hesse met his eyes. That we have lost the Battle of the Atlantic. We lost it approximately 18 months ago. Everything since has been dying for a war already decided. 3,000 kilometers away, Werner Brandt received orders for his final patrol. U-221 was to attack the convoy assembly point at Halifax, disrupting supply operations that Berlin still believed could be strangled. Brandt read the orders twice, then burned them. His crew did not need to know they were sailing toward death. They had survived 11 patrols. 11 times they had submerged while depth charges exploded around them. 11 times they had surfaced to find aircraft circling overhead, radar-equipped hunters that gave them minutes to dive or die. The men who had served with Brandt in 1940 were gone, transferred or killed or broken by the psychological weight of hunting while being hunted. We depart at dawn, Brandt told his first officer. Inform the crew. They already know, Hercule. They've known for weeks. Brandt nodded. There was nothing more to say. The mathematics had spoken to in Gander. Samuel Pilgrim watched the 1,000th aircraft of the month climb into an April sky. He had stopped counting months ago, but the base commander had announced a milestone over the public address system. 1,000 aircraft in 30 days. More would follow. The production schedules posted in the maintenance hangar showed no end, only increase. Samuel still thought about the German agent he had released. He did not know if Lang had survived. He did not know if his mercy had been treason or compassion. He knew only that somewhere across the ocean, men were dying in machines he had helped prepare, and other men were dying in submarines trying to stop them, and all of it was governed by numbers too large for individual choice to matter. The war would continue for 2 more years. Gander would deliver another 15,000 aircraft. The U-boat arm would lose 700 submarines and 30,000 men. None of these numbers would be changed by courage or sacrifice or the small mercies of frightened young men standing at fences in the dawn of WWII was detected approaching Halifax on May 3, 1943. 3 Liberator bombers from Gander responded within 40 minutes, guided by radar systems that could track a periscope from 15 miles away. The attack lasted 11 minutes. Depth charges bracketed the submarine's dive pattern with precision that left no room for escape. Werner Brandt died at his station, watching the pressure hull collapse. His last thought was of the aircraft formations he had watched pass overhead 3 years ago, when the war still seemed winnable and the sky belonged to no one. In Berlin, Friedrich Hesse filed his final report. It contained everything he had learned about Gander, everything he had warned about since 1940, everything that might have changed the course of the war if anyone had listened. The report was stamped defeatist, restricted and buried in archives that would not be opened until the Reich itself had fallen. Samuel Pilgrim lived to see the end of the war. He returned to his fishing village, married a woman from St. John's, and never spoke of what he had done at Gander. Sometimes, on clear nights, he watched aircraft pass overhead and remembered the stranger at the fence, the photographs that could not change history, and the mathematics that had crushed an empire. The airfield remained. Runways cracked. Hangars rusted. The forest reclaimed what it could. But the concrete endured, a monument to the weight of numbers, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, standing silent in the snow where hope had come to die. The boreal forest stretched to the horizon. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic, U-221 rested in darkness. And in the archives of a fallen Reich, Friedrich Hesse's impossible map gathered dust, its warnings unheeded, its prophecies fulfilled, its truth finally acknowledged by a world that had learned too late what numbers could do.